All right, it is time to say good afternoon to Tom Mulcair. And our feature, of course, as always, is brought to you by Guaranteed Industries, reminding you they've teamed up with Can-Air, so they'll keep you nice and toasty warm when winter gets here, and winter will get here. 514-342-3400. They've been serving Montrealers since 1957. Tom, I guess, today, fair to say, Mark Carney laid out most of what we could expect coming up in his fall budget, or not?
Well, certainly some parts of it, but it's the backing down on another key element of the fight against climate change that surprised me the most, because Carney's written about this, he knows about it, he's worked in this field. I would honestly say that of all the people in the financial world, he knows more about sustainable development, climate change, reducing greenhouse gases than anybody else. He's a smart cookie. So that's why this is such a disappointment, because, of course, the Liberals under Justin Trudeau basically did nothing. They brought in a carbon tax that they started dismantling almost immediately when the pressure started to come, and then it was taken off completely by Carney when he ran in his election. That was the first big piece. One of the other pieces that remained was, we keep using this funny word, but a mandate, basically just making it obligatory for the car companies to sell 20% of their fleet as electric vehicles. And they're all ramping up to that. They've known the date for a long time. There was no issue. And all of a sudden today we hear Prime Minister Carney saying, well, this will provide immediate financial relief to car companies. Really? Really? You've got a study proving that this will provide immediate financial relief. Why? Because it costs that much more to make an electric vehicle than another one? The retooling's already been done, Aaron. And the Americans have basically decided they're not going to be building that many electric vehicles while Trump is there. And there's still a strong demand in the market. So I'm still scratching my head over this one. By the way, since there was a very strong and very pointed and very valid critique of what they were up to from the Premier of Manitoba, Wab Kinew, who's a very good Premier. And he said, really, you've decided we're not allowed to buy electric vehicles from China. If you were allowing electric vehicles in from China paying normal tariffs, you'd be able to buy a good electric car for 25 grand Canadian, easily. 25 grand, even lower than that. And we've decided to keep them out by charging 100% tariffs. And there's no reason for it other than the fact that that's what the Americans were doing. At the same time, we were using the argument, well, we're going to be part of the market for electric vehicles because we're going to build all these battery plants for electric vehicles. Really? So we've thrown $20 billion of taxpayers' money at that by decisions made by bureaucrats and politicians who know nothing about business. Most of that money is going to be lost the same way it was lost in Northvolt here in Quebec. Why is it going to be lost? Because they don't know what they're doing. They know nothing about business. Oh, and by the way, they're building up for a technology that will be obsolete by the time any of these places get built. But that's the folly of having people pretend that they're business people using taxpayers' money to try to get their mugs in the newspaper. So with regard to today's announcements by Carney, the absolute opposite of sustainable development, which requires you to look at the economic side, yes, but you also have to look at the environmental side, and you have to look at the social side. And this is a question of what kind of country we're going to be leaving to our kids and our grandchildren. And this is a real mess that we're going to be leaving. Canada is not going to be able to ever meet its obligations under the Paris Accord. We couldn't do it under Trudeau, by the way, but at least they had made a couple of moves that went in the right direction. But every single report that's been done by Canada's person who's responsible for auditing sustainable development, there's a specific commissioner under the Auditor General for that, has said we're nowhere near respecting our obligations, and we're further away than we've ever been. And this is a huge disappointment for people who care about climate change, the fight against climate change, who care about, of course, the environment. It's a real letdown to see that today from the Liberals.
Do you take any solace in the fact that, they said, okay, 2026, 20% for EVs, we're waiving that, but they did say there'd be a 60-day review. Do you not place any hope in that?
No, none, zero. It's just a stalling tactic. It's just a classic government stalling tactic. And they'll come up with another date that they won't meet either, because there'll be an excuse for not meeting that one. Look what they did. Manitoba complained about this, about the electric vehicles, because it said because of the 100% that Canada put on Chinese electric vehicles. By the way, there was never any debate about that in Canada. There's never any proof that the Chinese government was illegally subsidizing them under international trade rules. We just went along with the Americans on that one. So what they've done to shut up Manitoba is they said, we've got $300 and some odd million to turn canola into diesel fuel. Oh, that's brilliant. So you're going to, in a world, on a planet where there's not enough food for everyone, and canola is a wonderful food oil, we're going to be taking ours and using it to run tractors. Brilliant. So it's a complete failure, Aaron. And the bit about stalling for the next 60 days doesn't convince anybody who knows anything about this subject.
Wow. I was going to say when you started talking about this that I was under the impression that the major manufacturers we know had been to meet with Carney. They'd been to Ottawa more than once. I thought this was, the government or Mark Carney saying to them, okay, I've heard you, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to force that 20% EV mandate for 2026.
Yeah, but they're not forcing anything. They've been tooled up for this for a long time. They've known that this is coming. Now, at the very last, it's probably going to be just as problematic that they're taking it away. Some of them will probably have no trouble, by the way, meeting the 20% because they've done everything that they had to do to come up with good products that can actually, be sold in a market to consumers who want them. But the United States.
So what would be the rationale here, Tom, for doing this then?
The rationale is to go in lockstep with the Americans again. The Americans are ripping out. Trump's administration is ripping out charging stations that are already in place. They're not saying we're not putting in new charging stations. They're actually removing them. So they have an ideological aversion to electric vehicles. They see it as part of a woke, pro-environment movement. They want good old gas-driven cars, V8s, if they can get them back in production. This is the world we live in. It's the world turned upside down. But Canada doesn't have to go along with that. We need an independent foreign policy, which we don't have, and we need an independent trade policy, which we really don't have.
He also talked today, I think, about trying to reach, speaking of trade policy, obviously, we have other clients or should have other customers around the rest of the world. He wants to see that reach 50%, I think, of our trade, given the fact that we have 75% of it now with the U.S. Is that achievable?
That's a really good idea. And there's one other good idea that was announced today, which is a Buy Canada program, because we've been watching the Americans with their Buy America program for decades, and we've just been twiddling our thumbs as Canadian companies were told, if you want to do any, sell any of that stuff in the States, come and open up a factory in upstate New York. That's why Bombardier had a big rail factory in upstate New York. That's why Lion Electric, which has since, of course, turtled, but they had to build, some of the school buses in the States if they wanted to sell there. So that part is good. So there are some things that they're doing that are on the right track, putting $5 billion on the table to help the industries and the sectors of the economy that are being hit the hardest, like lumber, like the minerals like copper and aluminum and the like. That's a good idea. We have to do that to let them survive. But I'm still waiting to see what Carney comes up with. You mentioned it at the beginning. Is this already a hint as to what's going to be in the budget? The budget better deliver on what he said it's going to be, which is cutting the size of Canada's outrageously bloated civil service. We have a government that is out of control in terms of its size. Nobody seems to have a real grip on what they have to do. He says that he's told his ministers they each have to cut 15%. If he does it, I'll be the first one to applaud, because we have $20 billion a year that we pay to outside independent companies because the civil servants can't get the stuff done because the civil service is even more inefficient than usual. There was a very straight-up statement, François-Philippe Champagne, finance minister, yesterday saying, we're going to be firing people.
Yeah.
And we'll see whether any of that comes to pass.
Tom, I would ask you one last thing with respect to this Angus Reid poll that came out. It was the basis for my question today that shows Mark Carney's personal disapproval has now fallen twice. It's 6% down from last month, 12% since June. And I asked the question, is this fair? And I think for the most part, the consensus was, you know what? No, the guy's only been in the job for a few months. It's not fair for you to already disapprove of what he's doing. How do you feel?
That's just typical stuff. You're going to disapprove of him if you vote conservative, and you get that across the country. I'm not worried about that. No, I think that Carney is one of the best people we've ever had in that job, despite the strong critique that I have of his moves today. I think that he does understand the environment better than most, as I mentioned before. But at the same time, he is taking over the worst government in recent Canadian history, the Trudeau government, which was useless in terms of the economy, useless in terms of public administration. It was a disaster. So he's got to clean up a mess left by his predecessor, and you're not even allowed to say that because, of course, I can say it, but he can't, because otherwise he's criticizing the Liberals. And he's also trying to deal with the orange-faced lunatic south of the border who wants his face on Mount Rushmore. So, yeah, I mean, he's been dealt a very tough hand. But you go after these jobs because all the easy things have already been accomplished. He keeps saying that he wants to accomplish big things. His budget is going to be the test as to whether or not he's actually going to deliver on that.
Tom, you have a great weekend. I appreciate you coming on. Thank you.
Take good
care.